Hello and well met. This is Laren with the Fantasy Grounds Academy. I want to go over some things that usually come up when people are deciding if they want to invest in Fantasy Grounds or virtual tabletop. So one of the things you want to consider are what your needs are. It depends on really what you expect out of the platform and then what you know from actually using it. So you'll go online and do a little research, and you'll find a bunch of posts that say, well, I like Fantasy Grounds because of this, or I like Foundry because of that. And to be honest, if you cut everything right down the middle, they're all good at certain things and they're all bad at other things. So it just depends on what your needs are and what exactly you're trying to do in regards to running or playing in a virtual tabletop. There are lots of good quality content on all different platforms, Roll20 included, but there is some things that kind of separates them in the end from what you would normally consider as a boon or a hindrance, depending on what you need. So I don't really pay a whole lot of attention to those that are comparing platforms because they're really not one for one. They kind of all work differently. But one of the things I do like about Fantasy Grounds and why I invested in it is because I don't want to necessarily rely on being stuck with having to connect to the internet just to get my content. So that right there alone, without going into all the details of why and why not, is probably my biggest selling point, is that I can get on my computer and use it, and I don't have to be connected to the internet. That's probably the biggest benefit for me. I don't know if that holds true for rest of you, but that's one of the things and the reasons why I have Fantasy Grounds, other than, the features and automation, all that other stuff. So those are very comparable when you compare apples and oranges. I mean, yes, they're all fruit, but they have different qualities that make them better or worse depending on what the particular item is. So without further ado, I'm going to go into the Fantasy Grounds. I can't really speak too much on other types of virtual tabletops, but I do have a Roll20 account, and I don't really use it a whole lot. I didn't mind using it as a player, but I did not care for the DM side of things. So I basically just tried it a few times, and I just wasn't really excited about it, and it was a lot of work to get things prepped for games. So that if you're a game master, it depends on what your needs are. If you run stuff right off the books, you don't do a lot of homebrew, maybe it's easier, maybe it's harder, but nonetheless, it just depends on what your needs are. So the first things first is I want to talk a little bit about the website. I think there's a lot of things that are overlooked here. So a lot of the complaints that I've seen online are the cost. So when you buy an ultimate license, generally it's $150, could be a little less, could be a little more, depending on where you live. If you buy it on Steam, you will get your local pricing, so it'll be a little bit more affordable. It's still rather expensive for most of the people outside of North America. So that is a start of what some of the main arguments are. Honestly, if you're just going to run games and you just do that casually once in a while, then just do a subscription model. It's like $10 a month, or in this case, if I hover over this, it's $10 for the first 3 months and then $9.99 from that point forward. So that's not too bad. Just remember, if you start a subscription and then you turn around and cancel it, it's going to stop that day. It's not going to stop 30 days from that time. So just remember that. The other thing is, if you decide you don't like it and you purchase the license on the Fantasy Grounds store, they'll give you your money back. I mean, they're not going to hold you hostage. However, if you buy it on Steam, if you don't do it within the first couple hours, it's probably not going to give you a refund. So there's different policies in place for the Fantasy Grounds store and the Steam store. The only difference really between the two is the local economy pricing, and then you can keep track of your hours that you put into it in Steam and a couple other minor things, but other than that, there's no difference. And then you have the standard license. So if all your players already have their own license, you don't really need to even get an ultimate. You can just use a standard license. The only problem is you can't host any demo players very easily. You just can only host other licenses. So that's one thing about the standard that's kind of limited. It's $40 for the one time, or you can start a subscription for $4 a month. So If you're the casual GM and everyone else already has their own stuff, that's the way to go. If you have like a group of friends or something and you want to get the ultimate license, maybe you can all pitch in or something. Fantasy Grounds doesn't really provide a way to share the account. It's not really part of the terms. I know in other platforms you're able to share your instance with it. The way that Fantasy Grounds is licensed and set up, it is not inherently designed that way. I'm sure people find ways around it, but it generally, this is for one player. If you are going to buy an ultimate license and you share the license and just have one person be the GM, that might be the way to go. So the standard license would be good for a player that wants to maybe create characters beyond using his GM's table. Because quite often, if you're just a free demo user, you don't have access to anything other than the campaign that you're in. And if you want to build characters on your own and do your own thing, you can't really do that with the demo so much. So a standard license might be something you want to get, and then maybe just like the main core book of whatever rule set you're in. That's probably all you need as a player. And then as a GM, you can build your library. You don't have to buy everything at once. I know that people get kind of overwhelmed and go, oh my God, I got to buy this, and that. Or one of the biggest arguments is, I don't want to pay for this again. I already own it in paperback or hardback. Well, the reality is that you can put in all that data into Fantasy Grounds yourself, but you still have to learn how to do it, and it takes time. One of the things you're paying for is the conversion from a PDF or from a text file into the Fantasy Grounds format. The other thing you're paying for is they have to store the data and the updates and stuff on their server, and then the ongoing maintenance if there is any, if there's errata or if they have any new features they need to add. So that's basically what you're paying for when you buy a license. It isn't just the book. You're paying for a lot of little things that are not really thought about until you start using it. So there's that. It is a platform that is reliant on your computer. You do have to make an account on the web page, and you have to connect to the account in the actual platform. So that's kind of prohibitive in some cases. Some people don't want to install a program, and they don't want to be logged into any website. So that is one of the limitations that might bar people from wanting to use Fantasy Grounds. It is a little bit of an older methodology of registration and keeping track of your licenses. But the thing is that Fantasy Grounds is not really a web portal. It's more or less an interface to play role-playing games. And it's not a web page or anything like that. So there is that difference. I think a lot of people would prefer to use a web-based client instead of an application. I'm kind of mixed on that. I think there's merit in both of those, but ultimately, I don't want to be cut off from my content. So if I can't get online or my internet goes down and I want to work on my campaign or something, I can't. So, or if I'm up camping, I can bring my laptop and a couple batteries and just kind of plug at it as I'm relaxing, that sort of thing. You can't do that with a subscription online, and especially if you don't have internet access. So that's just one of the few points I can make that's different than all the rest. All the rest of comparisons are pretty much a wash. Price-wise, it is a little bit more expensive up front, but when you look at the amount of features, automation, and the amount of detail that's in this particular platform, it makes up for itself on the back end. So, initially it's like, oh my God, I got spent like $1,000 on all this stuff. That does happen to some people, but you don't have to go out and buy everything. As a matter of fact, if you just get a standard license and one of the core books for your favorite rule set, that might be $80 tops. Then after that, save up, maybe get another book. You don't have to buy everything at once. You only really need the player's handbook or the core book of whatever rule set you want. Then after that, it's kind of a grab. What do you really need? What are you going to use? So a lot of people prefer to just buy the platform, and then they'll buy the core rule set, but they'll use like D&D Beyond or a different portal to input their own content as they go if they're doing homebrew. Another thing that's really handy about Fantasy Grounds is a lot of the work is done for you. So, for instance, Dungeons & Dragons is a very highly developed platform game system. Savage Worlds is pretty decent. And Starfinder and Pathfinder are very, very well adapted. Traveler has come a long ways. And then all these other rule sets aren't too bad either because they have a lot of the stuff put in for you. You don't have to do a bunch of stuff like making tables and bringing in the artwork and all that stuff. You generally don't need to do that with official content. You will, however, need to input any custom content, and that will take a little time to get used to how that process works. But all in all, if you look at the value versus the cost versus the time and all that stuff, it balances out. So yeah, you might get a cheaper route up front, but then when you go to run a game or when you need to prep, you're going to be spending more time doing that. So it just depends on what your needs are, what the rule set is, that sort of thing. So it just kind of matters to you if you're going to be using Fantasy Grounds full time or partially, or maybe you just want to use it, just to check it out. So if that's the case, just use the demo, find a one shot, join it, see if you like it. If it's too much for you or you don't like it, don't get it. That's all there is to it. Instead of saying, well, I'm going to go and put in $300 into Fantasy Grounds and then decide I don't like it, and then complain about it and say, oh, I'm going to go over to the Foundry. I don't like Fantasy Grounds. Well, usually it's because you haven't put enough time into it, or maybe you're not getting the right engagement. Whatever the reason might be, it's probably something that can be solved, but nonetheless, it's just one of those things. It's a preference thing. It's a cost thing. There's a feasibility thing, and ease of use. All those sort of things add up. One of the main complaints is the interface. I would have to say that I would agree that the interface has a lot left to be desired, but it has come a long ways since I first started, which is in 2017. It was still classic. It was really bare and pretty clunky. So they're making improvements as time goes on. They're not doing a complete overhaul and re-releasing it and making you pay again. So they're kind of doing it incrementally. So that's their business model. That's how they operate. Generally, they have to pay developers and themselves to create the content. Whereas in other cases for other platforms, they're not paying for all that. They're only making the base program, and they're letting the community do the rest of the work. So they don't have as large of an overhead in development costs as, let's say, Fantasy Grounds or Roll20. They probably have a lot more overhead when it comes to creating content. So that's something to keep in mind, is different business models. But if you're getting community-based product, is it compatible, is it quality, or you're getting professional quality? Those sort of things add up too. So it just depends on what you're doing. So if you use a platform that doesn't support D&D, then you're probably pretty much cutting out about 2/3 of the population that play role-playing games. So it might support tons of other games, but if it doesn't have an official license, you're going to have to find a lot of workarounds and utilities that are going to allow you to bring in your own content. Nothing wrong with that, other than the fact that it's probably not exactly the professional. And then on top of that, it may or may not be the same experience for each person. It depends on your familiarity with the platform, what type of plugins and modules you have, and what type of people that are engaging with you. So all those things add up. But I think all in all, Fantasy Grounds makes a strong case in regards to having the content ready for you, and that it's playable. And once you get a little feel for it, it's a lot of fun. I don't think that most rule sets also have a community such as ours that's willing to take the time to sit down with you and show you how it works, or give you some inspiration, or just to play a game with you. So there's that. And then the other complaint I hear a lot is like, I can never find any games. That's probably going to exist regardless of where you go. So if you go to Roll20, those fill up fast. If you go to Foundry Games, those fill up fast. So it's a kind of a matter of luck and being at the right place at the right time. And then also how you present yourself, or where to look for those games. So if you're always looking for games, get to know the community, find out where the games are being held and posted, and just put yourself in one place until something comes up. What I generally see is people wandering from one Discord to the next looking for a game. Generally, you're not going to find anything doing that. If you stay put somewhere, you get to know the community, eventually you'll get in on a pretty good game, or you can start your own game. So there's that. So there's all kinds of factors that go into choosing your virtual tabletop. And I use different things for different reasons. Like I might use Roll20 just for the store because I like their store, the way it works. But I don't usually play. And when I do play, it's a lot of fun, but that's because I don't have to do much. But if I'm the GM, I definitely don't use Roll20 for that. So as far as Foundry goes, the only reason I haven't touched it is mostly because I'm already invested in Fantasy Grounds. It's not a really good excuse, but that is definitely the truth. The other part of it is that I don't want to relearn a whole nother system. I don't want to spend all that time trying to figure out and configure all the plugins and stuff that you need to get things to work the way it would in Fantasy Grounds. So there are some things that you want to consider if you're going to be using D&D or a platform like that. Is you're going to have to get used to all the nuances and what stuff you're going to need to run it. So it just depends on how much effort you want to put into it, and then how much content that you have. So that's really a choice that you have to make. I can't make it for you, but one of the things that people ask quite often when they first start Fantasy Grounds is, what should I get? So that really depends on what you need. It really comes down to how much are you going to use the platform, and then how much you're willing to spend, of course, and then if you're going to be able to find games or host any games. So all those factors come into play, but there are quite a few supported systems on the Fantasy Grounds platform. Not all of these are developed the same. They have some differences. They're all based pretty much on the same platform, but when you go into the actual subtleties of each rule set, they all have different types of automation and different amounts of interfacing that you could do with it. Like some rule sets are more or less text and some tables and rolling. Some, like D&D, you have automation and scripting and all kinds of stuff that you can do to make things quicker and faster if you don't understand how it works. Savage World has quite a bit of automation to it. No, Pathfinder 2 has a lot of automation. Pathfinder 1 still has some automation, but it was like one of their first rule sets. So I don't know exactly how much they do and don't have. I know there's content for it, but I haven't played with it. Starfinder is pretty well developed, I have to say. It's nice. Traveler has come a long ways. It used to be pretty barren. Over the last couple of years, it's really grown quite a bit. So I really like the direction that Fantasy Grounds has gone in, but I think a lot of people have become impatient and they don't want to wait around to see the features unfold. So that's fine. It's your prerogative. It's your choice to abandon ship, but just remember that probably after this first couple of years, I think it'll be a lot better. There'll be a lot less of this himmering and hollering and people getting upset. Because what you kind of have is some new players that are getting into a newer system that's evolving. And when that happens, it's harder to grasp the concepts in it because it's constantly changing. And then you have the old guard here where the people have used it for years, and they're so used to the way it used to work that when a new feature is introduced, they get a little bit discouraged, or maybe it breaks something that they worked on before, whatever the issue might be. I think that's where, any form of negativity would probably come from that more than anything else. Other than that, the community is really stand up. I really appreciate and enjoy the people that I've interacted with. There's some pretty good folks out there. So what do you need when you first start? So we talked about licenses. There's, like I said, there's plenty of rule sets. There's a little trailer here on the front page. And then if you want to start off as a game master or a player, there's some links for that. So it's not just here, buy this and do it. There are some things to help you get started. There's also a quick start guide. There's a intro video, a little dated, but not too old. And then there's some helpful links here, like the quick start, wiki guide. There's a user manual. There's Fantasy Grounds forums, which is where most of the business is happening. Fantasy Grounds Academy, that's where I'm from, and this is something that we have built over the last 4 or 5 years. And all it is a hands-on training, inspirational kind of help portal. You have the official Discord for the Fantasy Grounds platform, and then there's the Fantasy Grounds Forge, which allows you to make extensions or subscribe to them, update, some paid add-ons that are made by the community. It's almost like the Steam community hub, except for it's attached to Fantasy Grounds. And it was kind of like an answer to people when they're writing extensions or they have some really cool mods. They don't want to necessarily have to keep uploading them and we have to keep downloading them from the forums anymore. there's a way to do it through the interface. So it's kind of nice that they've added this feature. It's fairly new too, and it's evolving. I think it's been around for maybe a year at the most, not even that. So it's a pretty new piece of the pie here. So when you come up to Fantasy Grounds, the first thing you're going to want to do is create a website password and a website username. That's your first step. So you create an account. That way, if you do buy a license or you do play in a demo game, you can input that into the client so that you can connect. So you do need an account. There's a downloads page here where you can get the Unity version here. You can get the Steam version. There's an installation guide. And there is one last final link for Classic. So if you're dead set on getting Fantasy Grounds Classic still, there's a link for it. And then there's the help link, which I think is quite often forgotten or passed up. So you have the quick start guide, all those different contact points I was talking about just before. And then you have looking for group, you have the game calendar, there's a site search, and some other things on here. So this is where most of your help is. And then there's a new program for affiliates. So if you want to advertise a certain rule set or just the store itself, you can become an affiliate for Fantasy Grounds. They give you 5%, and then if you sign up other affiliates, you get 1% of their sales. So it's kind of cool. There's the forums, which you're going to probably spend a lot of time in. So if you go to the City Hall, this is pretty much where all the release updates are, or all the new things that are official that come from Smiteworks. You have the tavern, which is kind of your basic chatting area. And the Commons is where you can talk about anything other than Fantasy Grounds, or you can talk about both. It's mostly non-related gaming stuff that you talk about there. The House of Healing for Unity is where you want to report any problems, or if you want to upload some screenshots of something you're not sure of, or if you have anything broken, that's a good place to go. House of Healing Classic is for the previous edition for Fantasy Grounds Classic. The House of Healing for the Forge is if you upload content to the Forge and you're having issues or some kind of technical stuff, that's that. And then the laboratory is somewhere where you can kind of look at what they're working on. So a lot of people ask if there's a roadmap or if there's some sort of way that they can see what's coming up. Well, if you go through these and you read them, you'll see the things that are being tested and worked on. So that kind of gives you an idea of what's coming up, what might be something you'd look forward to or something. But it's not really a list that they're going to necessarily keep to. It's kind of like they work on it based on shifting priorities. And if you're wondering about some of this stuff and you want to be part of the beta, this is where you would go. And if you're someone who just casually reads through here, you can look at these notes. You can see what they're working on. Some of it might not make sense to you, but some of it might, depending on the rule set they're talking about. So there's all kinds of different things that will happen as the development cycle goes. So there isn't any definitive list. They do mention on their shows occasionally, they'll say, okay, we're going to incorporate this or that into the platform, but they don't usually give a timeline or an actual date because they don't always meet that target. So it just depends on what's going on with their development queue. So there's a lot of different things. Like someone had asked about the new race import. So, it's just a matter of how this is how this is going to play out and getting people, used to the new tools and, testing them and that sort of thing. So really depends on what your needs are. But those are just some of the things that you'll come across. And then if you are into a certain rule set, they down here, the game systems, they have their own categories. And then some of the more smaller rule sets are all in the other game system. So they're no less or more popular, but they have their own little segments here, like sub-forums. And then like D&D has Classic, and then it has 3.5, 4, and 5. Pathfinder has both Classic and Pathfinder 2. Savage Worlds has its own thread. So there's threads for each main rule set, and then some of the rule sets have subdomains, like Call of Cthulhu has 6th and 7th edition. So it just depends on what you need. The create and share area, you have the armory that you can upload and share things for free. You can have a workshop where you can discuss mods and other house rules and new rule sets. And then you have the Find a Game section, which is a listing for convention. There's an Adventure League organized play thread. There's a Looking for Group area, which is just your standard one. There's Pathfinder Society, Starfinder Society, and if you go into the specific other rule sets, there might be a thread in there about organized play for those, because it's not just Pathfinder and not just D&D and Starfinder. There's others too. So that is basically the gist of the website. So once you get used to the website and where things are, then it helps when you actually use the tools that are in front of you. It is a little archaic to use the forums, but it is very helpful once you get used to it. So let's go to the store. So the store usually puts the top sellers on here, and as you can see, a lot of it's D&D stuff. What you're going to see is every week there's new releases, and then there's usually something on sale. So not always, but 99% of the time, there's at least one item that's on sale. So if you don't want to buy everything at once, you can go into the store on the first page and generally find a couple things on sale. So like this Applied Aggregate and Spelunking is normally $20 today, or whenever by next week it'll go back up, but it's $15 now. Same thing with the Level Up Adventures Guide. It was $27.99. Now it's $22.39. So this wasn't released that long ago. I mean, maybe a couple months ago. And it's already on sale. So if you got the patience and you don't need everything right away, you can slowly build up your library. You don't have to go out and buy everything at once. However, there is an option. If you're a collector and you got the funds, you can go to the store and you can go to bundles. So what this does is it provides you to buy just about everything. Like there's a Deadlands bundle, there's some token bundles, map bundles, then you have like a D&D Essentials, and then an Adventures bundle, Kobold Press bundle, there's a D&D Completionist. So there's a lot of options for bundles. And one of the more newer ones is a Traveler one. So there's some pretty cool bundles there. And then you have the Lost Omens bundle, which is like a whole bunch of different stuff. And then you have Kobold Press bundle. So there's a ton of things that you can buy in bulk. And usually you'll save anywhere from 10 to 20% overall. And then on top of that, if you buy these during a sale, which normally happens a couple times a year, usually we just got over one, and there'll probably be another one around Black Friday or Christmas. So that's generally when the big sales are. But in the interim, once in a while, there's a holiday sale, or there's things like that. So you don't have to go and buy everything under the sun. If you want to, you can wait and kind of drag it out, or you can just have your players help you buy it. So then there's the art subscription, which is kind of an overlooked thing. This is where you can buy all the assets for the map tools. So instead of importing all your own stuff, you can use the tile sets and the different terrain and the brushes and some of the other nice tools that can be used to create your own maps within Fantasy Grounds. One caveat is you cannot print a map from Fantasy Grounds. That has to stay within Fantasy Grounds. The benefit of that, though, is that if you create a map with Fantasy Grounds using the tools internally, it cuts down the amount of memory and the load on your bandwidth. So instead of sending a bunch of files over, you're just sending the coordinates, and Fantasy Grounds pretty much reassembles those on the client side. So it kind of cuts down on the lag and the sort of things that most virtual tabletops suffer from when the maps get very complex. So that's one benefit of it. The subscription for $50 for a year is pretty decent. I think it's worth it. It's definitely something that you got to decide if it's useful to you or not. If you don't use them, then probably not. But if you want to try using them, maybe just do a couple months and see if you like it, and then just cancel your subscription. Or if you like what you're getting, then you can just go for the whole year. It just depends on what your needs are. But these work in all rule sets or most rule sets. And then you can also buy separate map packs that come with certain rule sets, like the flip mats for Paizo products, those sort of things. So there are those too. So you don't always have to buy the map packs. Thank you for following. Yeah, thanks, man. Yep. All right. So the other thing that I wanted to go through is, let's see, there's personalized suggestions. So once you have an account, if you've already purchased a lot of stuff and you want to, maybe someone wants to buy you something, you can give them this link, and this would be unique to your account, and it would give them suggestions on what to buy you based on what you already have. So if you already own half of the stuff on Fantasy Grounds, this will only show the stuff you don't own yet. So if you were going to get a gift or someone wanted to buy you something for a present or something, this would be a good link to have. It also gives you a way to sort out stuff that you already have versus what you don't have. That's kind of a nice feature. So quite often, though, when you see a discount, when you go to buy something and you see that it's on sale, when you go to, or if you have a discount because you have the bundle pricing, because you do get a discount if you add something to a bundle that you already have, you normally don't see that discount until it's in your cart. So you won't notice the price difference until it's actually in your store cart. So if I go back to the shopping area, and if I want to look for something, let's say I wanted to buy something that's on sale, maybe this. Well, I already own it, so that may not be a good example. But if it's something that you already own, that's not really going to show anything important. Let me see if I can find something I don't own. Let's see. So, all right. So here's, if you own like all the Starfinder stuff or anything like that, that's a good way to get all the PDFs on the Paizo website. So that's a good deal. So if you own digital copies of your books on the Paizo store, you can synchronize between the Fantasy Grounds store and Paizo store. So that counts for Pathfinder, Pathfinder 2, and also Starfinder. So if you do a Humble Bundle and you buy a whole bunch of PDFs for like $30 and you register them and everything, if you synchronize with the Fantasy Grounds store, so if you come up to the store drop-down menu and you go to this Paizo account synchronization, what that does is it gives you the ability to retrieve your purchases from the official Paizo.com store. Now, this only counts towards PDFs and stuff, not the hardback. So this says everything that's owned, and that updates the Fantasy Grounds one, and then I'll send all my Fantasy Grounds purchases to the store. So when I go to Paizo, I get the PDFs basically for free. If I buy the stuff in Fantasy Grounds and I already have the PDF, I will get the module minus the cost of the PDF. So if the content is like $50 on the Fantasy Grounds store and I already have the PDF, the purchase for me is going to be like $40, maybe $35, depending on what the cost of the PDF is. And then if you add your bundle pricing on top of that and then a sale, you're really going to make a killing on that. So there's just things to keep in mind. The other thing is some people have asked, well, how do I know what stuff has line of sight already included? So there's a little symbol next to modules that you will buy that will let you know if it has line of sight built into it or not. So for instance, I'm going to look at this allies and antagonists. I don't know if it has any maps on it, but when you look at this, it'll have these little logos next to here. So this probably doesn't have a whole lot of maps to it. So it doesn't have the LOS logo. So that's for line of sight. But if you buy something like these flip mats, for instance, those should have line of sight on them. If they don't, I don't know why. But for instance, here's a flip mat for Starfinder. So if I click on that and look at the description, it has this little LOS symbol and it says FGU. So it was compatible with Fantasy Grounds Unity. So these are things that you would look for before you purchase something. So if you wanted to know if someone's already done all the line of sight in there, that's how you would know that this little symbol means that it includes predefined line of sight presets for this particular module. So those are ways that you can kind of look at, what things have been optimized and which haven't. Most of the official content, if it has maps, if it already has line of sight on it, there are probably a few third-party products that need to be updated, like maybe a couple older Kobold Press modules or something like that. But in general, most of the stuff has already got this stuff put in. So it's just a matter of what your tolerance level is for what's complete and what isn't. So I know in some modules maybe the line of sight isn't that great and you might have to adjust it a little bit, but in general they're pretty good. Most of the people that do these conversions or that know how to use the map tools generally do a pretty good job. So that's just some of the features that you get with Fantasy Grounds. That partnership between Fantasy Grounds and Paizo is really good. I've taken advantage of the Humble Bundle. I went and bought like 100 different, or not 100, but maybe like 20 different books for Starfinder, and then I synchronized it with the website and with the with the Paizo store. And when I went to Fantasy Grounds, if I wanted to buy one of the modules that I already have in PDF format, it takes off the difference for that. So maybe I can get a discount on this. Yeah, see, I don't own this, so let me see if I add it to my cart, if it'll actually give me the discount. I don't know if I own the PDF. So I'm going to click on buy, and then I go to my checkout. What I notice, it's $31.99 because it's already on sale. But let's see what the checkout shows. So this is probably something that I don't own yet in the Paizo store, but I'm still getting the weekly sales discount of $8. And this is what I was telling you. You won't really see your discount until it's in the cart. So if you're panicking about that, that's how you can check. So that is basically the gist of that. So that is, when you need to buy something, generally you just need to get the core rulebook and maybe a license. Start with that, or get a subscription so you're not out all that money. And if you don't like it, if you've purchased from the Fantasy Grounds store, they'll generally usually give you your money back. If it's within 30 days, they'll just credit you, and they're not, no questions asked generally. I'm sure there's some exceptions, but in most cases, they're going to give you your money back. There is a way to activate a product by key. Once in a while, you'll purchase something from a third-party website. They'll give you a key, and if you click on that, you can copy and paste your license key in there, and then that will give you the actual key for whatever product it is that you're registering. So that is an exception. That's very rare, but it is out there. Make sure you sign up for the newsletter, because the newsletter actually gives you, the news, all the latest sales, any events that are coming up, and then you can subscribe. Let's say you like D&D and Savage Worlds or something. You can subscribe to those, and then it will kind of customize your experience based on which rule set you're interested in. And then you'll see like a list of sales. The newsletter is really beautiful. It's usually pretty colorful and artful, so it's not all spammy. It's usually 1 or 2 pages long, and they don't send it to you like every day like some places do. So once a week, you'll get a list, and it will tell you all the different things that you have. So you can sign up, and if you participate in the forums and such, or the game calendar, you can track your order history for purchases that you've made on the website. So what it's saying is, like, anything that you've purchased, if you go to store and you go to order history, that's where all your licenses are. So if you lose your license key, you can go in there and track that down, and then you can add it to Fantasy Grounds. So that's just some tools that you might want to know if you're going to be investing in Fantasy Grounds. So you have a supportive community. You have a halfway decent store. It has some functionality, like you have a filter up here that you can use. So if you wanted to look for alien stuff, but then you want to use a filter, so you want to hide items that you already own, and then it has line of sight. So you have all these different filters, and then you can hit search. It's not going to show me anything because I already got everything for the alien rule set. But nonetheless, that's how you do it. If you want to back out of a payment, or you don't want to buy something, you can clear your card out. So it's got some pretty good functionality. It's not too bad. The UI for the store is okay. It's not too bad. Sometimes if you have a small screen, you got to be careful how much you're zoomed in or zoomed out. Sometimes you don't have access to all the menus. So if you got a small laptop and you're navigating in this Fantasy Grounds store or the website, you got to kind of watch your zoom level. So that's pretty much the majority of the stores aspect of Fantasy Grounds. And then when you actually get into using Fantasy Grounds, you install the demo client, you plug in your actual username, and you plug in your password, and that will give you access to the store. It gives you access to update, and it will give you access to other games when you join them. So I'm going to switch over from the Windows thing there, or from the display capture, and I'm going to take a look at Fantasy Grounds. So let me get rid of that, and We don't want to look at that. So, okay, so now that we have Fantasy Grounds, let me make sure I got this set up right. So I got rid of the display capture, and I want to show the Fantasy Grounds game. So we'll do that. So that's right. And what else has we got here? There's the browser, so we'll turn that off. Okay, so here's the Fantasy Grounds platform. This is where we're going to take a look at some of the stuff. So generally, when you first install Fantasy Grounds, over here on the right, it'll say demo. When you're connected, when you have your account connected, it'll have your username on the top left corner. And on the very top corner here, where it says lobby connected, that means the live lobby where you can connect to others is functional right now. It means it's online. And on the top left corner of the interface, there's a folder that takes you to the back end of Fantasy Grounds where all your modules and extensions and stuff are stored. Then you have this little hamburger menu where you can compile logs and things like that if you're having trouble with Fantasy Grounds. And generally, when you first start, if you have the demo, you want to click on check for updates. And what that'll do is bring up a separate little window. It'll go into the Fantasy Grounds archives, pull out any updates. It'll also update from the Fantasy Grounds Forge. It'll pull in any incremental changes or a rule set errata if there is any. So it just depends on what's going on. But generally, once a week, there's some updates. It's usually on Tuesdays, not always, but usually Tuesdays is when those things update. So keep that in mind if you're playing games. You don't want to run an update before the actual game or event. So if it's like around Tuesday, you want to be careful with that. Maybe wait till after. The other thing is communicate with that with your players. And then on top of that, you can go into the Fantasy Grounds website and you can read about the changes that are being made before you update. I don't know how many times I've seen people just click update because it's just a natural thing to do. And then they go, oh, it doesn't work or it's broken. They'll find out that a lot of their third-party apps, like their extensions, have been broken. So they'll have to go and make sure that wait for the developers or the producers, people who make those extensions, updates Fantasy Grounds. So then when you're in your settings, you can go in there and you can add your username or your password, depending on what it is. So here I have this check for updates thing here. So I want to check to see what that's all about. So it looks like I think I've already done it. But I had 2 instances of Fantasy Grounds going, so we'll see what happens. But this is a way that you update things for Fantasy Grounds. Generally, it gives you this red dialog box that lets you know that there's an update. It doesn't warn you about the updates from the Forge yet. So if you're looking to update from the Forge, you can randomly just click the update and it will pull in if there's any updates from the Forge. They don't have an indicator yet as to when those particular things are updated. So generally, those are piggybacked on top of Fantasy Grounds updates. So maybe a day or 2 later, you're probably going to get a bunch of different updates from developers of the extensions. So in the settings, once you have updated, this is basically where you'd put your license key. You put your username and your password, and then you click log in. If you don't have a license key, just leave it blank and just hit log in and then update it, and that will be, your client will be up to date. So if you connect to another table, your software will be compatible with the host. This is the Ftu Application Ui Scale. I have mine set to 80. I think 85 to like 95 is a good sweet spot for most people. If you have a tiny monitor, it's hard to scale for that. But if you go too small, you can't see anything, and if you go too big, you run out of desktop space. So there's a happy medium in there. If you have it in a laptop, you might want to go down to like 95% at the most, or up to 105% for scaling it upward. But any more or less than that is going to be too small or too big. Anyone that has like a 20-inch monitor or greater, I'd only have a 22-inch, so I have the scale to 80%. I can still read it. It's not too small, but I have a lot of room on the desktop, so that's important. So here's your account area where you can link to Steam and Paizo. There's an advanced thing that you would use. You can switch directories if you need to. This is also where you would switch over to the beta or the test development area. So if you want to help Fantasy Grounds test, you can do that. But I don't recommend doing this if you're in a game, maybe a development campaign, so you can take a look at stuff. I wouldn't do it in your live campaign. And then you have a troubleshooting thing where you can show your setup, you can clear the vault, you can clear your settings, you can force an update, or you can gather some logs. So there's these different tabs for getting set up. But when you first start, you just need to put in your username, your password, and hit login, and then save. And then you will hit the update button, and it will pull in any recent updates that have to do with the platform. Now, when you don't own any content, you just get, like, depending on the rule set, like 5th edition, you'll get the SRD, those sort of things. So I'm going to go into Fantasy Grounds and just start a new session. So I'm going to create a campaign. And what I'm going to call this is the D&D 5e SRD, just so you can get an idea of what you're getting. So D&D -SRD, I'll just say fresh, or this is new, so it doesn't have any mods or anything. And I'm using these underscores. I don't recommend using a bunch of weird characters, but the underscore seems to work okay. And now I'm going to select the rule set, so I'll just say D&D 5e. And then I can decide if I want to make this private or public, so I'm just going to click LAN for private. I don't have anyone connecting. And then these are the extensions. So when you're first starting out, you don't really want to put in a bunch of extensions. You kind of want to learn the vanilla platform before you start adding in a bunch of things. It can get really confusing, and if something's broken, you won't really know that. The other thing is I have a font called Roboto. This is free on the Forge. This kind of improves the visibility of the chat window in Fantasy Grounds, but other than that, it just slightly. I mean, it's barely noticeable. So I'm going to hit Start. So I'm going to load into Fantasy Grounds with just the bare minimums. So you can kind of see what this rule set gives you. Other rule sets don't give you much, or you have to buy the complete rule set just to have the base. So like Call of Cthulhu, there is no preview module or SRD for that. You have to buy the rule set, and then you'll have the option to log into it. Pathfinder, D&D, and a couple others have an SRD or like a basic rule set. So you can log into those if you need to do so. So this is just going to be preliminary. I'm not going to get too deep into this, but I wanted you to understand kind of what you're getting into when you're getting ready to buy or invest into Fantasy Grounds. So I'll be getting over with this shortly, but once you can kind of get an idea of what to expect in the beginning, and then there are plenty of other videos that talk about character creation and setting up campaigns and building your own maps and all kinds of stuff. So there's lots of YouTube videos, official and unofficial, out there. There's a lot of really good Discord communities. I can recommend one, and that's the Fantasy Grounds Academy. The other would be the Fantasy Grounds Pickup Games. If you're looking for Adventure League games or just some one-shots, that's a great place to find games. So it's the Discord is called the Fantasy Grounds Pickup Games. Just let them know that I sent you, Laren. And if you need help with Fantasy Grounds, or you're getting frustrated, or maybe you need some help like right away, you can come into the Fantasy Grounds University or the Fantasy Grounds Academy, and use the resources there too. And then don't forget, there's an official Fantasy Grounds Discord too for the actual platform. So when you need help, you can go there first. If you're not getting the help, come on over to the Academy and we'll give you a hand. So this is the launch screen, and this is generally what it looks like when you first start. This setup screen is kind of an ease of use, kind of a user-friendly type thing. So what you have here is show on load, this little dot here. If you click on that and you when you come back into this campaign, this will not come up again. This is a direct link to user guides and forums. I'm going to hit next. This is where you would load your modules, any rule sets that you own, anything like that. I'm just going to click on the 5e SRD. That's the system reference document. That's basically the core basis of the rule set. You load that up, you kind of have enough just to kind of look around. Don't expect to be able to build a bunch of characters and such. It's very limited. And there's not a whole lot of artwork. So that's something you want to keep in mind when you first start Fantasy Grounds, is you're not going to have a lot of content if you don't invest in it. So you can enter your own, but it does take a little time. So just keep that in mind. So I want to
also explain that it depends on the rule set. Like I said, some don't have these to start with, so it just depends on what rule set it is. So I loaded the SRD content. That was a confirmation. If I wanted to load up any more modules that I might own, that would be something. But there is a map module that comes with Fantasy Grounds, so I'm going to go with FG map, I think is what I'm going to search for, or maybe just map. There is a map pack that comes with the Fantasy Grounds basic, and it's basically just a map pack that you can load that is just a way for you to check things out. So here's the FG Battle Maps is what it's called. That comes with the Fantasy Grounds basic, even the demo. And then if you don't, if you want to check out images and stuff, that's the way to do it. And then, so now if I go to next, it's going to take me to the options. So you can go to the options menu. Once you get familiar with Fantasy Grounds, you'll know which ones you want to change, that sort of thing. You can change this background decal if you have content. You can go back to the setup that you were just in. You can set up a message of the day for your players. You can add or manage your languages here. You can add or manage currencies. And then there's a token lights where you can actually set up your own custom lighting for spells and such. So it just depends on what you're doing. But over here on the right, you have this area, this section. So you have tools, library, player, campaign, and character. You can collapse that by clicking this arrow. You can get it down to a very minimum so you got more room, or you can expand it all the way out. So you have tools, which is all your settings and such. You have your library, which is your modules and your assets. You have the player area where you can maintain, import, export characters. You have your campaign section, which is a lot of the content you're going to be using to run games. And then the character area is where you would build your characters and level them up and that sort of thing. So that's just the real basics. And then over here on the left, you have a chat window. Pick up a dice and roll it, and it will record the results. You can change the color of these dice. You have these advantage and disadvantage buttons. So if you wanted to roll with disadvantage, you can click that button before you roll, make your roll. Fantasy Grounds will know what to do with it, and then it'll roll disadvantage. What do you know? I rolled a 20 and a 4. It dropped the 20. How funny is that? All right, so there's lots of different things you can do with Fantasy Grounds. I'm not going to be getting into the bulk of it, but this is basically what you're going to be faced with if you use the D&D 5e rule set or something similar. So hopefully that helps you a little bit with if you want to decide if you want to even buy it or invest into it. Just depends on where you're at and what you need. So take care, everyone. Have a great weekend. Don't forget that next weekend is our Founders Day weekend, all weekend from the 29th to 31st. Friday, we're going to be on Fantasy Grounds Fridays in the afternoon. Some of you might be at work, so it'll be archived. Saturday, Doug's going to drop by in the morning in Eastern time, like around 11. And then a few hours after that, we're going to have a symposium with all the major token creators, the ones that make those fancy top-down tokens. Then after that, on Sunday, we're going to have a symposium that talks about audio and how to incorporate it and using Fantasy Grounds with that. And then after that, I'm going to be on the All Things Fantasy Grounds show with Rob. This is one of my former gigs there, and talk to him about the Founders Day and come to a close. So hopefully you guys can make that. Join our community if you haven't already, and also check out Fantasy Grounds. Even if you don't want to buy it, just get the demo and try to find a game to join.